The Odyssey is usually remembered as a poem of movement. Islands scattered across the sea, monsters rising and receding, storms that scatter ships and men. But Homer is not especially interested in geography. In fact, the poem only becomes intelligible once we stop asking where Odysseus goes and start asking why he doesn't arrive. Odysseus is intelligent, favored by the gods, victorious in war, and singularly motivated to return home. He wants Nostos more than glory, more than conquest, more than immortality. So why does it take him 10 unnecessary years? Why does every man who sails with him die? And why does the poem locate the beginning of that disaster not in fate or cruelty, but in a single, unnecessary shout, made after he was already safe? Homer does not resolve this tension by appealing to fate in the abstract or to divine cruelty in general. Instead, he locates the origin of the disaster with uncomfortable specificity in a single human act. Odysseus, already safe, shouting his name back at the Cyclops. The moment is easy to underestimate because it is not immediately catastrophic. No thunderbolt strikes. No ship breaks apart. Nothing explodes on cue. But the poem quietly marks it as a turning point. From this moment forward, delay becomes patterned rather than accidental. The sea is no longer merely dangerous. It becomes personal. This does not mean everything that follows is mechanically determined by the shout. Homer is more careful than that. Odysseus will make further errors. His crew will make worse ones. But the shout establishes the terms under which those failures will now matter. It is the act that turns misfortune into consequence. What the shout reveals is not stupidity or cruelty. It reveals a tension at the core of Odysseus' intelligence itself. The conflict between intelligence as a tool for survival and intelligence as a claim to identity. Up to this point, Odysseus' conduct in the Cyclops cave is exemplary. Trapped with a creature immune to law, hospitality, and fear, he immediately recognizes that strength will not save him. Appeals to custom are useless. Direct violence would be suicidal. So he does something more impressive than heroics. He restrains himself. He introduces himself as nobody, not as a joke, but as a precise act of social reasoning. He anticipates how Polyphemus will describe the attack and how other Cyclopes will interpret that description. He resists killing Polyphemus outright, understanding that escape requires patience rather than vengeance. He times the blinding carefully, waits while danger remains active, and engineers an escape that depends on discipline rather than spectacle. This is one of the great demonstrations of intelligence in ancient literature precisely because it refuses recognition. It works because it remains anonymous. And it succeeds. Odysseus escapes. His men escape. The monster is neutralized. The problem, as far as survival is concerned, has been solved. That is exactly why the shout matters. When Odysseus reveals his name, Odysseus, sacker of cities, the act has no practical benefit. It does not increase safety. It does not protect his crew. It does not deter future threats. It accomplishes one thing only. It assigns authorship. It ensures that someone knows who did this. It is tempting to dismiss this as simple arrogance, but that is too crude. The impulse is more subtle and more culturally intelligible. In heroic Greek culture, deeds require names. Kleos depends on identification. An anonymous success is, in a sense, unfinished. Odysseus' shout is not aberrant behavior. It is orthodox behavior carried one step too far. That is what makes it dangerous. Homer is not condemning a personal flaw so much as interrogating a system. The same values that reward ingenuity also pressure the hero to expose himself once the danger has passed. Odysseus does not shout because he is irrational. He shouts because he is, in heroic terms, behaving correctly. Homer treats this correctness with brutal seriousness. In the world of the poem, a name is not just a label. It is an address. As long as Odysseus is nobody, he exists outside the network of consequence. He cannot be targeted by memory, prayer, or vengeance. The moment he names himself, he re-enters the moral and divine economy. That economy matters because Polyphemus is not merely a monster. He is the son of Poseidon. Once Odysseus is named, Polyphemus can pray with precision, and the prayer he offers is revealing. He does not ask for Odysseus's immediate death. He asks for delay, for loss, for isolation, for a homecoming stripped of companionship and ease, if it comes at all. The punishment fits the exposure. Odysseus is not destroyed because his intelligence is real and formidable. Instead, he is forced to experience the long-term cost of letting recognition override restraint. From this point on, the sea ceases to be neutral. Storms stop being random. Odysseus is not lost. He is being answered. This does not absolve him of later failures, nor does it turn his crew into innocent victims. The men repeatedly disobey explicit warnings. They slaughter the cattle of Helios. They panic, grow careless, and make choices that doom themselves. Homer is clear about this, but leadership concentrates consequence. Odysseus's intelligence is elastic enough to preserve his own life, yet not disciplined enough to insulate those who depend on him from the risks his exposure creates. Once Poseidon's hostility is activated, ordinary mistakes become fatal. What might once have been survivable errors are now terminal ones. This is where the poem becomes genuinely uncomfortable. Odysseus is not a fool. He is not malicious. He is extraordinary. And yet his brilliance functions asymmetrically. It saves him. It does not save his companions. Homer never resolves this tension. He lets it stand. The gods themselves are divided for similar reasons. Athena supports Odysseus not out of affection, but because he represents intelligence at its sharpest, adaptive, imaginative, responsive to circumstance. Poseidon opposes him not because Odysseus is simply immoral, but because he violates a boundary. He humiliates a god's son and insists on being known for it. The divine conflict mirrors a human one. Cleverness without containment invites retaliation from forces that do not tolerate exposure. As the poem continues, Odysseus's intelligence does not diminish. What changes is its orientation. The arc of the epic is not toward greater ingenuity, but toward greater restraint. This reaches its culmination when Odysseus finally returns to Ithaca. The demand placed on him there is almost paradoxical. The man whose name echoes across the Mediterranean must erase himself. He does not return as a conquering king, but as a beggar. He withholds his identity. He watches. He listens. He tests. The parallel to the Cyclops episode is exact, but inverted. In the cave, anonymity is a tactic. In Ithaca, anonymity becomes a discipline. The difference is not cleverness, but maturity. Odysseus has learned that intelligence constantly asserting itself becomes unstable. The man who once shouted his name into the open sea must now learn to disappear inside his own house. Only then does homecoming become possible. This is why the Cyclops episode is not an early detour, but a template. The length of the journey, the hostility of the sea, the loss of the crew, the divided gods, and the final demand for disguise and patience all echo that single moment of exposure. The poem is not about wandering as such. It is about what happens when intelligence refuses to remain silent after it has already succeeded. The Odyssey is often summarized as cleverness triumphing over brute force. That is true. But it is not the point. Homer's harsher claim is that cleverness must learn when not to speak. Intelligence is not only the ability to solve a problem, it is the ability to recognize when the problem is already over and to stay silent anyway. Odysseus survives not because he becomes smarter, but because he becomes quieter. He relearns how to be nobody, not as a disguise, as a discipline. By the end of the poem, the greatest danger is no longer monsters or gods or the sea. It is the impulse to step forward and say, "This was me." The Odyssey does not ask whether we are clever. It asks whether we know when cleverness turns against us, and whether we can stop before the sea answers back.